Oh, you alright, Ludo? Yeah, I'm struggling with this puzzle here, right? And it doesn't have an easy mode option, so instead of figuring it out, I'm going to waffle on about why this difficulty irks me to distract myself from my own ineptitude. Let me explain. When designing any game, regardless of the genre, it's going to appeal to a wide variety of players, be it casuals or the hardcore. No, casuals isn't a slur, it's just a descriptor. Anyway, because of this, it's important to be able to adjust the game's difficulty to make your mechanics engaging for that broad spectrum, be that through combat, puzzles, or narrative deduction. This can be done in a variety of ways, but the most common way developers have been handling difficulty systems for decades has its own set of issues that might be holding their games back. Because if implemented haphazardly due to cargo cult thinking, video on that up here, it can lead to repetitive, spongy, and simply boring gameplay. But before we can deconstruct why modern difficulty systems aren't working, we first need to understand why they exist at all. We see them in most single-player games, ranging from easy, normal to extreme modes to choose from. Normal mode is the baseline, the version of the game where the developers have set the balance to what they believe is enjoyable and manageable for the majority of its players, making its obstacles have the appropriate level of challenge to tell the correct story through Ludo narrative. That's a story being told via play. You want Kratos to feel like the god of war during play, and its normal difficulty is balanced to achieve this. And because such a high percentage of players choose this option, it's the version that is most heavily playtested and focused on during development. Easy modes, on the other hand, are either for people who want to enjoy the narrative without the stress of the game's intended challenge, or for accessibility reasons. And because of this, easy modes are, easiest to design, because balancing for ease has a wider margin for error than balancing for challenge, like in hard modes, which are designed to challenge a game's most devoted players to master and exploit the utter depths of its gameplay systems. Now, at face value, these seem like three solid ways to balance your game for a varied audience, but there's something wrong with how most developers have been approaching these systems for years now. Blindly adding them without understanding why can lead to bland and kinda insulting gameplay. Now, in terms of difficulty adjustment, there are two basic schools of thought, doing it quantitatively and doing it qualitatively. Quantitative adjustment is simply changing the numbers, how much health and damage the player and enemies have or do respectively. Now, this is simple but can drastically change how a game feels. Slightly adjusting how much damage each individual bullet does in an FPS can completely change how a player needs to approach each firefight. Just compare the one-shot headshot tactical fights of Rainbow Six Siege with the puffer jacket bullet sponge firefights of The Division. It's night and day, mate. On the other hand, we have qualitative adjustment, where we give the player new verbs to play with, making changes on a fundamental level to alter how the game operates to better suit the selected difficulty. For another FPS example, you can say what you want about Call of Duty, but Infinite Warfare has a hidden specialist difficulty, and its qualitative adjustments are nutty. No, okay, yeah, hear me out. It's meant to be as realistic as possible in terms of the damage inflicted to the player and their enemies. And this isn't just with one-shot headshots, but if you're shot in the leg, oh, whoopsie poopsie, there goes your ability to walk. Shot in the arm, oh, now aiming down sights, throwing grenades, or using equipment is difficult or sometimes impossible. All of this would have required unique redesigns of each of the game's systems, and the developers didn't have to do this. It would have been much easier to do quantitative adjustments to the balance numbers, but instead they took the time to develop unique experiences for their most hardcore of players. This is all well and good, but the problem is that this can be an extremely expensive process, and simply adjusting the numbers is a lot cheaper, and therein lies the problem. To create their easy or hard difficulties, most developers choose the quantitative method, only adjusting the numbers to the extremes on either side regardless of the effect it will have on the player experience, because it's simply cheaper to do. On easy modes, this isn't much of an issue, but it becomes a huge problem on harder difficulties, leading to repetitive, uninteresting, but still punishing gameplay that in some cases completely breaks the fantasy and Ludo narrative of the game as a whole. You no longer feel like Kratos, destroyer of the Pantheon, when it takes 15 hits to kill a basic mook. The entire relationship between play and story is broken because of how these modes have been balanced, and repeated failure due to the difficulty and punishment starts to deconstruct this illusion of power over time as well. Difficulty isn't about how much the player dies or how long it takes them to kill an enemy, but how much mastery over the primary and secondary gameplay systems the player is required to have before inducing that failure. And quantitative difficulty in most cases doesn't add anything, it just makes it an endurance test. Silksong, I'm dropping that name here for no particular reason. So how do you solve this problem? By ignoring that problem and playing games. Wait, is this an ad transition, you little shit? This video is brought to you by Once Upon a Galaxy, the collectible card battler that hooked us earlier in the year on mobile, and it's now available on Steam. From the team that helped create Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone, Galaxy is fast-paced, free-to-play and fun, which are three of the four most important Fs in the English language, and I'll let you guess what the final one is. It's fun. You'll put together a crew of iconic characters from across myth, legend and fiction, like Lightning Man, King Deceiver, and Whale Obsessor, in the most satisfying team-up since the combination of Pizza Hut and Taco Bell in one building. Yum? Question mark? If you like your games easy to pick up but incredibly deep to master, then Once Upon a Galaxy is for you. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Steam or your mobile app store of choice to start putting your Once Upon a Galaxy crew together today. That just threw me for a loop. Where were we? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. It's possible to pivot any design to use the qualitative mindset with some effort. For example, with The Witcher 3. As it stands, The Witcher 3's difficulty settings are balanced quantitatively by adjusting numbers. In the story mode, enemies have minus 50% health to make them easier to kill, and Deathmarch, its hardest difficulty, enemies have 80% more health and deal 230% more damage to Geralt, leading to repetitive but still overwhelmingly punishing gameplay in its hardest mode. But what if we were to look at The Witcher 3 from a qualitative difficulty mindset? How can we make The Witcher's hardest mode difficult but still engaging? Let's take a look at its systems. Geralt is usually tasked to take down some beastie, mostly through unavoidable banter, but when it does come to blows, Geralt needs to use the suitable sword, signs or potions to take down the appropriate enemy. This is the fantasy of being a Witcher carried over from Andrzej Sapkowski's novels. But even on its most insane difficulty, none of these systems are required to play the game. It is a lot more noticeable, but you can still brute force your way through most combat encounters using the inappropriate tools. So instead, let's make it so that you cannot defeat an enemy unless you truly understand the right methods to use, having hunt down books, talk to locals, cultivate and brew the correct salves and potions needed to take down or help your target. All of that truly embodies the Ludo narrative of being a Witcher, and the thing is, these systems already exist in-game. Developers spent precious time crafting them, placing them in the world, writing lore that ultimately amounts to fluff for most players because there is no mode that requires this knowledge. And yes, this makes fights way more complicated, but forces players to engage with the world at its deepest level, and as their knowledge grows with Geralt's, they will intuitively understand what techniques to use to take down certain enemy types. Now, would this become frustrating for a lot of players? Yes, but in that case, the most insane difficulty is not for you. That's why multiple difficulty options exist. But if all you're going to do is simply adjust the numbers, it might be better to just not have difficulty options at all. Many games, some of the most popular in fact, have been developed with a single difficulty option for all of their players, and there are lots of advantages to developing like this, but also some pitfalls. For one, it's easier to test and then balance the mechanics for intended game feel, but as we've seen with Silksong, this might not be accessible and therefore not fun to a huge amount of players. How these games get around this is by having one difficulty, but then adding quantitative adjustments baked into them and then putting those adjustments into the player's hands. If you're struggling, further engagement with the game's systems reduce the immediate difficulty of the next challenge. Simple leveling systems are the best example of this, but it can also be seen in Silksong's tools and needle upgrades, Hades 2's Arcanas, and Dark Souls' weapon shards. It maintains the initial challenge determined by the developers, but then allows the players to augment that difficulty based on their level of engagement with those secondary systems. But what do you do if you don't have something like a leveling system? A great example of a game that has one difficulty and is intended to be extremely challenging is Celeste, but the difference is that they also inform the player of an assist mode when you start a new save, which can allow them to access features like infinite jumps or no damage on hazards. They warn them that this will ruin the intended challenge of the game, but include this feature for people who may need it. Yeah, that's right, I bet when you thought you clicked on this video I was going to say abolish all easy modes, and yeah, I am in favour of accessibility features instead. Well, because it's easy to get trapped in our own minds, Ludo, of our own experiences when playing games and not factor in others and their unique experiences. Just because you can get through Dark Souls at soul level 1 hitless, yeah, that's all well and good, but some people struggle to even move the character in game without assistance. Does the initial difficulty of Souls games mean that those players should be gated out of enjoying the world and its rich narrative? Does it take away from your experience in tackling Celeste challenges if someone else is having just as much fun using the assist mode? Gaming is sometimes the only escape people have, and to deprive them of getting to explore the wonderful worlds that we've created is just fucking heartbreaking. Celeste is the perfect example that you could develop for intended difficulty, but then add accessibility options to allow the game to be accessible. You can in fact have your cake and eat it too. Now, I'm not saying people who solely develop difficulty modes are lazy or anything. That's just what the industry has been told to do and what players have been taught to expect. But developing for intended difficulty and then altering it via accessibility options covers a wider spectrum of players, and it's just going to take some time to become the norm. But this shift has already started happening. Bloober Team, for example, in their Silent Hill 2 remake, had individual selectable difficulties for both combat and puzzles, which is a huge step in the right direction. Easy or hard modes can be really effective if they're done qualitatively, to give the player more verbs to use catered to their skill level, but this is extremely rare. If that's not manageable and you can't do much more than tweak some numbers, your time would be better spent balancing for a dedicated difficulty and then adding accessibility options, placing them in the player's hands. There is a reality where games can be hard and accessible at the same time, and if you're fighting against that for whatever reason, well then maybe secretly you might be some kind of demonic horse. Think about that. But while you're at it, what do you think? What is one of the most challenging single difficulty games you've ever played, and how did they put the balance of that in the player's hands? There's lots of different ways to do this, and I'm wondering what examples you have. Let us know down below, because we'd love to discuss this with you. Ludes, I just checked and I saw that you're not in the Second Wind Patreon. And can I tell you, Missy, that you are missing out. We have Patreon Hangout movie nights, we have exclusive experimental videos, and a bunch of other goodies that you could be involved in, but I guess you're too busy with, I don't know, not having thumbs. Well, yeah, that is fair. You do work here too. Okay, yeah, I'll get you added to that after this. Alright, time to say goodbye, Ludo. Alright, bye guys.